Once upon a time, there was a young woman named Sarah who always felt like her life was moving too slowly. She'd pray and pray for things to happen, but it seemed like God was never listening. Sarah would look at her friends getting married, buying houses, and starting families, while she felt stuck in the same place. She'd cry out to God, "Why aren't you answering my prayers? Don't you care about me?" But no matter how much she pleaded, nothing seemed to change. One day, Sarah met an old woman at church who always had a peaceful smile on her face. Curious, Sarah asked her how she could be so content. The old woman replied, "My dear, I've learned that God's timing is not our timing, but it's always perfect." Sarah scoffed, thinking to herself, "How can that be true when everything in my life feels so wrong?" But the old woman's words stuck with her. Sarah began to wonder if maybe she was missing something. She started to look back on her life and realized that there were times when things didn't go as she planned, but they turned out better than she could have imagined. Like when she didn't get into her dream college, but ended up meeting her best friend at the school she did attend. Or when she lost her job, only to find a better one that allowed her to use her talents in ways she never expected. Sarah realized that patience wasn't just about waiting, it was about trusting. She remembered a verse from the Bible that said, "But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." She began to understand that waiting wasn't passive, it was an act of trust in God's plan. As Sarah learned to be patient, she started to see how God was working in her life, even when she couldn't see it. She thought about the story of Joseph in the Bible. Joseph was sold into slavery by his own brothers, falsely accused of a crime, and thrown into prison. But through it all, he remained faithful to God. And in God's perfect timing, Joseph was raised to a position of power that allowed him to save his family and many others from famine. Sarah also remembered the story of Esther, a young Jewish woman who became queen of Persia. At first, Esther was afraid to speak up for her people when they were threatened with destruction. But her cousin Mordecai reminded her that perhaps she had been placed in her position for such a time as this. Esther found the courage to approach the king, and her bravery saved her people from annihilation. These stories showed Sarah that God's timing was always perfect, even when it didn't make sense to human eyes. Joseph's years of hardship prepared him for the role he would play in saving lives. Esther's position as queen, which might have seemed like just a stroke of luck, was actually part of God's plan to protect his people. Sarah began to see that God's plans were often beyond her understanding. She realized that just because she couldn't see the whole picture didn't mean that God wasn't painting a masterpiece with her life. She started to trust that even when things didn't make sense, God was working behind the scenes. This new perspective changed how Sarah lived her life. Instead of constantly questioning why things weren't happening on her timeline, she began to look for ways God might be working in her current situation. She started volunteering at a local shelter, where she discovered a passion for helping others that she never knew she had. She took up painting as a hobby and found it to be a wonderful way to express her creativity and connect with others. As Sarah grew in her faith and trust in God's timing, she found a peace she had never known before. She still had moments of doubt and frustration, but now she could look back on her life and see how God had been faithful even when she couldn't see it. She began to encourage others who were struggling with the same feelings of impatience and disappointment. One day, Sarah met a young man at a church event. They started talking and realized they had a lot in common. As they got to know each other, Sarah thanked God for bringing this person into her life at just the right time, when she had learned to be content and wasn't desperately searching for a relationship. She realized that if she had met him earlier, she might not have been ready for the kind of deep, meaningful connection they now shared. Sarah's story spread, and soon she was asked to speak at women's events about trusting in God's timing. She would share her own experiences and the lessons she had learned. God's timing is always perfect, she would say, even when it doesn't feel like it. We may not understand his plan, but we can trust that he is working all things together for our good. She encouraged others to live with faith, trusting that God was working behind the scenes even when they couldn't see it. Embrace God's timing, she would say, and trust in his perfect plan. It may not always be easy, but it will always be worth it. As Sarah finished speaking, she looked out at the audience and saw faces filled with hope and renewed faith. She smiled, remembering the frustrated young woman she used to be, and thanked God for his perfect timing in her life. She knew that her journey wasn't over, but she was excited to see what God had in store for her next, knowing that whatever it was, it would come at just the right time. If this story really resonates with you, why not share it with someone who might be going through a tough time? It could mean the world to them. And hey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more uplifting and motivational stories just like this one. Your support truly makes a difference.